Hello and welcome. In this episode, we are going to summarize the developments on the whole front line, and we're going to ask the big question, are the recently reported gains of the Ukrainians for real? After its defeat in Kharkiv, Russia has begun attacks on the civilian infrastructure within Ukraine, mostly the thermal power plants. Those attacks, which can only be seen as a revenge for its defeat, have led to large-scale blackouts within Ukraine. And if they are aimed at civilian infrastructure, as it seems, they can add themselves to the long list of Russian war crimes in this war. In response to that, the Ukrainian president Zelensky made a speech which might to some degree go down into the history books. You probably have already heard of it and can listen to it. It basically started with the same principle, like he's saying, if we have the choice to be hungry or be with you, we rather be hungry. If we are warm or be with you, we rather be if we are freezing or rather with you, we are rather freezing, and things like that. That's what we have in overall. Now let's go to the big news in Kharkiv. Now you'll find channels on this platform and on Twitter which will tell you how far the Ukrainians have advanced further. I find maps basically saying that everything between Kupiansk and Kremina, basically that top corner here, is now in Ukrainian hands. On this channel, I only report gains like this if I personally am convinced that they are true, or if I'm not sure, I will set them straight for you and say how certain I am according to the sources I found. And as of now, I have to say I don't find a single proof of the Ukrainians having actually crossed the Oskil. That's this river here. Not even to the eastern part of Kupiansk, not even the eastern part of that town where they definitely hold the western parts. I have not seen single proof that the Ukrainians are here. Now, I'm not saying I might not have missed something, but that's at least what I see. While this is the case, it is kind of questionable if the Russians have actually managed to muster enough forces to stop the Ukrainians on that whole front line. As of right now, it seems more that the Ukrainians are focusing on re-establishing themselves, on clearing their own hinterland, and to reinforce and resupply themselves before they advance further. As it seems as of now, the whole international border between the Oskil west of the Oskil, inside of Kharkiv Oblast, is again under Ukrainian control. If not right now, then they are about to get into control. The Russian withdrawal from this side of the river has been complete. Now they are clearing up the rear areas, probably still catching the occasional Russian soldier that was left behind. They are demining, they are getting booby traps out of the way, and they are collecting the big amount of loot of captured equipment they were managed to get into their hands. That's the other point. We have signs of enormous quantity of captured Russian equipment by the Ukrainians. It is increasingly, we are getting to a point where we can imagine that the Ukrainians have gained enough equipment that they might be able to set up a new armored brigade if they decide so. Obviously, another option might be that they spread out the captured equipment to fill up losses in other units, but the amount of equipment captured, especially in Izium, is enormous. We have tons of pictures and videos, even though I can't give you a full overview yet, but we are talking about hundreds and hundreds of items of big military equipments. In Izium, there was the Russian First Guard tank army, which is basically destroyed. That's what the British Ministry of Defense says. That unit is one of the elite unit of the Russian armed forces, and usually in peacetime it's responsible for the defense of the capital, Moscow, and in in times of war, it's supposed to be one of the spear tips of the Russian armed forces against NATO. After already suffering heavy losses in this war, they were in process of being reconstituted in Izium when they were overwhelmed and surprised by the Ukrainian advance. In Donbass, we have news about a full Russian withdrawal from Svetove and Kremina, but I'm extremely skeptical. First of all, the full withdrawal from Svetove now is getting a newer news is getting somewhat set a more balanced way, that supposedly only the Russian armed forces moved away. The militias from the so-called Luhansk People's Republic are still there, which would mean the Russians are still there, their armed forces. And secondly, that even if parts of that is true, that doesn't justify to claim that the Ukrainians are already under control. I take only pictures and videos as a proof, or the Russians admitting that loss. And as I have not seen the Russians themselves claiming they've lost that town or even significant parts in that area at all to the Ukrainians. On the other hand, there are now, you will find a lot of people arguing on Twitter, especially, that the Ukrainian side has asked for operational silence to its soldiers and the social medias to be tight-lipped when it comes to advances for operational security. But we have seen west of the Oskil, we were able to basically witness any advances by the Ukrainians in real time. As we got every hour, we had new pictures and new videos of Ukrainian flags being raised in certain towns, of soldiers letting their photograph being taken at road signs at the entrance of towns, etc. And the moment they go to the other side of the Oskil, perfect operational silence, not a single sign. I somehow don't believe that. So as of now, I actually don't think there has been any advance over the Oskil, not even in eastern Kupiansk. I have not seen any proof of that, whatever anyone will tell you. And it is also not really conclusive. For me, it's not convincing when I see something like this, where Twitter accounts, even though they are usually fairly accurate, that they claim Kremina, it's fully withdrawn from Kremina. Here again, the Russians supposedly abandoning Kremina, this way abandoning their lines of communications into Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, even though they might not go over Kupiansk anymore, but they could still pass Svatove north to Russia or east to Russia. So that Kremina is given up, to me, doesn't make fully sense. We even find maps like this where it's from Defmam, where it's supposedly already in Ukrainian hand. There again, I have my high doubts that this is actually true. Lyman is also being sold to us in some websites, even some maps, as being under Ukrainian control. The latest news I had is 1 day old, roughly 24 hours. And according to that, it's geolocated, the propaganda units from the so-called Donetsk People's Republic was still in Izium, so Izium was still under Russian control. Now, this might have changed in the last 24 hours, but as of now, I don't expect that to have changed, which means Izium is still in Russian hands. What is not, though, no longer in Russian hands are Bohorodichne and Sviatohirsk. Both of them we see this here is Sviatohirsk. That's the famous, I can get the picture a little bit bigger for you maybe. That's the famous monastery. This is on the side of the Siversky Donetsk, which was under Ukrainian control the whole time. This, on the other hand, should be on the Russian side, and now there are Ukrainian soldiers, so we can take it for granted that we can now accept that Sviatohirsk is likely now under Ukrainian control. And we have this here from Bohorodichne, Ukrainians in the center of town, and an easy Google search shows us this is the same church. But on the other hand, Bohorodichne was at least contested, if not under Ukrainian control, for for the last weeks and months. So that isn't that big of a deal that we have proof here. What I have seen though are images from the road signs entering Bilohorivka, which would mean there has actually been a small offensive into Luhansk. And I'm not sure if it was in Bilohorivka or if it was really close to it. So it might be that the Ukrainians have actually crossed back into Luhansk Oblast, at least for a few meters. But the messages that were spreading, among them from Sergei Haidai, who is the Ukrainian governor of the Luhansk Oblast, that the Ukrainians are at the outskirts of Lysychansk, is at least optimistic, unless you see Bilohorivka as one of the outskirts. Because I have not even seen proof that they are actually in Bilohorivka, let alone that they have passed it and are at the outskirts of Lysychansk. So in this regard, again, we have big claims of Ukrainian advances and little to prove for it. I might be wrong there, but if you're looking for somebody who will explain the Ukrainians as successful no matter the proof he has, then I guess you have to look for somewhere else. That's not the way I run this channel. What we do see is further Russian claims of successes in Soledar. So from this region on, there is now again Russian offensive activity. Soledar, I explained in past videos, is of high importance as it's connecting to the two main lines of communication between Bakhmut and Siversk, which is right behind the Ukrainian line of defense, and thus allows for easy redeployment, easy reinforcement, easy supply, etc. Should the Russians be able to cut that here to Blahodatne, then the Ukrainians would have to go vastly around, lose a lot of time, basically lose a big part of their advantage of the inner line that the defender in this case can exploit to its full extent. There are further attacks. The Chechen commander there claims that they have gained ground, but there is nothing to prove his claim. So as of now, I cannot confirm that the Russians have actually advanced there. About the area south of here, there are some rumors within the pro-Russian Telegram that the Wagner mercenaries might have gained some ground without even saying where. So this again I consider as part of the rumors. What we do have is information of the attacks west of Donetsk. Again, the Russians are attacking, mostly aimed at Avdiivka. No proof of any ground gained by the Russians, and the Russians say there hasn't been an attack on the airfield here, which was reported over the last days. So the Russians say the Ukrainians didn't attack the airfield. I cannot confirm this in total. I'm not sure if it might be possible that the Ukrainians attacked there and conquered the airfield, but I have not seen proof of this. So this as well is being considered as completely rumor. It's somewhat irritating if you see it in total, though, that between Bakhmut and basically Marinka, the Russians are still attacking in a phase where their front in Kharkiv has collapsed and where they are still losing ground in Kherson. We'll come to that soon. In this case, usually you would expect the Russians to thin their lines here to stop their attacks and use those freed units that were so far used in attacks to help them defend in other fronts to stop the Ukrainians there. As of now, they don't do that. Why, I can't really explain. I'm pretty sure you can imagine something, what might the big strategic idea behind that. If you have an idea, please write it in the comments. Give us your idea why the Russians might still attack there while they're losing or at least are under pressure in every other part of the whole front. There are more rumors of Ukrainian concentrations in Vuhledar. This would kind of make sense if you think they are going to attack in the direction of Mariupol, even though they are the first pro-Russian Telegram channels also already claiming that those forces are dispersing again, so that the Ukrainians are withdrawing from Vuhledar again. Should the Ukrainians reach Mariupol, that's 70 kilometers more or less. So that would be a big success for the Ukrainians, and it would obviously mean the moral benefit of having recaptured Mariupol, where the big siege has happened at the beginning of the war with Azovstal. It would cut off the landlines of communications in southern Ukraine towards Kherson and the Crimea. But at the same time, to me, it seems fairly unlikely that this is actually possible, because one spearhead punching through isn't everything. They need to secure their flanks, which would mean they would most likely need enough forces to widen the gap to both sides, not just enough to secure themselves, but also to have enough buffer to bounce back from a Russian counterattack into their flanks without the southern tip the spearhead having been cut off. Because if they wouldn't do that, that whole attack could turn into an utter disaster and the complete destruction of the units attacking here. So the risk for it, unless they have significant forces, in my book, is far too high to take that risk to do one punch to the Azov Sea here. It would only be possible with a massive concentration of forces, and there it seems highly unlikely that the Ukrainians are currently capable of that, when they are currently running a big offensive in Kharkiv and another, maybe from the total numbers, even bigger offensive in Kherson, that they still have the forces to concentrate for a third big offensive towards Mariupol seems fairly unlikely. This is it about the Donbass. We can go to Zaporizhzhia now. Here, the information, here the front line was fairly quiet. Of course, more Russian shelling on the other side of the reservoir, but that's something that's happening every day. So I don't feel it's something that really needs reporting. What we do have is information about the nuclear power plant. It is off the grid now, and the electricity needed for the cooling is apparently available and is guaranteed, because nuclear power plants, when the fuel rods are taken out of the core, they are still producing immense amounts of heat over weeks and probably even months. So during that time, they have to be actively cooled, otherwise they would melt, which would would mean a molten core of the nuclear power plant. And for that, it's obvious that electricity is needed for that active cooling. And this is the good news about the power plant here. The electricity for that active cooling seems to be available, at least as of now. Now let's come to Kherson. We have additional reports about destroyed ferries. Lvove was mentioned by name by the Ukrainians. Also further attacks on the Russian logistics and command structures. Again, all of this usually with HIMARS, Excalibur, etc. All of this also not new. It's something that's going on here for months. And what is interesting, though, is that the Ukrainians are now reporting they've, in parts of the front line, reached the second line of defense. In past situation reports, especially on the German channel, which many of you won't have watched, I reported over the last months how the Russians have reinforced their lines and that they were building one additional line of defense after the other. So defense to allow for a defense in depth. They even brought prefabricated concrete pillboxes, bunkers to the front line. And that, at least here, the good news for the Ukrainians is that in some lines of the front, they at the very least have punched through the first line of defense. So, but there's still a lot of things to do ahead of them. What is interesting, though, first they are the Russians are also working on reconstructing the road bridge here at Nova Kakhovka. The road bridge here on the dam has partially collapsed. There are efforts now by the Russians in place to rebuild it, to make that road bridge available again. What is interesting, though, is that we have reports of a Chechen unit of 1,300 men arriving on this side of the Dnieper in the bridgehead, in the Russian bridgehead. First of all, still reinforcements being pushed in would indicate that the supply situation is not that dramatic. Otherwise, you would not send in additional troops, at least not if you have some understanding, because more mouths to feed would mean everybody there already gets less. And the same, obviously, with ammo and everything else. So it seems that the logistics situation is somewhat under control. On the other hand, that could actually be, again, as it's specifically mentioned, it's Chechens. We could come back to that rumor. And and as of now, to me, it's only a rumor, but supposedly Chechen units are being used to hold the line behind the front line. So if Russian troops are retreating, soldiers are deserting, they are being caught by the Chechens, and depending on which comment you read, they are punished, captured, imprisoned, or executed. So those might be an indications that the Chechens are not here for fighting, but actually to make sure the front line is holding by threatening. And that would fit to a message we have from the south. I'll just pull this forward right now. I hope it's not going to get too chaotic later. There has been a report about a unit of the DNR, of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic, here in Kyzylivka, which supposedly fled towards the Dnieper. Now, this cannot, from my understanding, from every source I found, I cannot confirm that this actually happened to its full extent. It's mostly coming from the Ukrainian side, and there are some satellite pictures showing that armored vehicles are missing. But they might have moved somewhere else, even closer to the front line. It isn't, to me, it's not fully proof that they fled, but if they are fleeing, that would be an indication that the Chechens are coming to prevent further retreats and desertions by units here by threatening them. Especially here, obviously, we see it's one of the main roads going directly in Kherson. So if that part of the front line would be weakened by desertion and mass flight, it would be a disaster for the Russians. The Ukrainian side, which I cannot remind you often enough, is obviously an active participant in a war and has thus an interest in giving us false information if it suits their own military goals. But they said the 810th Marine Infantry Brigade has lost 85% of its personnel, and the rest is now refusing to fight. This shows us two interesting things. First of all, it would show us that this unit is completely destroyed. 85% is far beyond anything which Western nations would consider a unit being rendered unfit to fight. We are basically talking about about remnants, about fractions of original subdivisions of that brigade that are still there, and still they sent them to fight. And it shows that even despite having lost 85%, they apparently, if that information is true, the Russians were intending to send the last 15% still to the front line to keep fighting, despite that unit despite the fact that that unit must have lost completely its cohesion, its combat effectiveness, everything. They were still supposed to keep fighting. If that's true, then we are talking about a situation of complete it would be a sign of an extreme situation and urgency when it comes to personnel. Those are things that I would expect of Berlin in April 1945, not necessarily from this war while Russia is in a neighboring country. Losses to an incredible amount, and then not replacing that unit but forcing it to keep fighting. As said, that's from the Ukrainian side, and thus I can't fully confirm it. In the north, there aren't many news. It seems they have widened their gains a little to the southeast, but Olhyne, Vysokopilia, and Novovosnensenske, I think, are still under Ukrainian control, and it seems the Ukrainians still haven't managed to conquer Arkhangelsk. Apart from that, not too much activity. I have no reports about attacks from either side, which doesn't mean they happened, but it's likely that they weren't too big. Interesting, though, is the Kherson bridgehead, and here we see another big claims on the internet again. First, the Russian side confirms, Reiber says Novorendnieve and Mala Saidemynuka are conquered. Those are those two towns here. They are on the left side of the Inholets, the eastern side in this case, and are directly adjacent to the existing bridgehead. So it kind of makes sense that they pushed south along the Inholets to conquer it. Maybe the Russians even withdrew to not get cut off. But in the last status report, I said that Chaslive is likely under Ukrainian control. And now we have the report from the Russian side that the Ukrainians are in Stepove, Kalove and Vyshneve. So basically those three towns. And when I already saw videos claiming that the Ukrainians broke through in the center and it's becoming a big victory, when we can see it's basically 6 kilometers. So 6 kilometers is not nothing, especially along this front where it's a slow grind, where the Ukrainians have to grind forward town by town, but at the same time, it's not a defeat of the Russians here. They are not about to reach Novakhovka. So this is also somewhat exaggerated in other videos. The only proof I have is that they gained a little ground to the south, but as we can see, it's a mere 5 kilometers and far from anything decisive. When it comes to the south, it shows us that the balance of power between the Ukrainians and the Russians isn't as one-sided as it was in Kharkiv. I have reports about Russian counterattacks here at Snihurivka, which also shows that the Ukrainians still haven't been able to conquer it despite weeks of fighting here. It is still in Russian hand. And I already told you about the retreat of the Donetsk People's Republic people, and in this case, it's also interesting. Not only did the Russians send in another 1,300 Chechens, as I already mentioned, the latest analysis I read and the latest estimation is that the Russian forces on the right side of the Dnieper actually number between 25,000 and 35,000 soldiers, not the 15 to 25,000 that were still reported roughly 2 weeks ago. So either they have reinforced them in the meantime, or the analysts and the Ukrainians are now reaching a point where they think they have misunderstood and underestimated the Russian forces on this side of the river. As of now, it's completely unclear if the Ukrainian offensive in Kharkiv has already reached its culmination point. It seems fairly unlikely, though. In general, we should be able to expect further Ukrainian attacks fairly soon, especially as it seems highly unlikely that the Russians have been able to create solid and well dug in positions along the whole line of the Oskil River, which according to, for instance, Strelkov, a pro-Russian former colonel in the GRU and a former militant leader here in Donbass, and he is a nationalist, an ultra-nationalist running a Telegram, obviously with a lot of military knowledge, and he claimed that the Oskil at this time of the year is shallow enough to be able to be forded by foot or with even wheeled vehicles. If that is true, then the river might be a small aid for the Russian defense, but not a bulwark. So in this case, we might see further Ukrainian attacks, and in general, we should be able to expect them. As of now, we see that the Ukrainians likely focus on refitting, refueling, getting supplies here, as well as clearing up the back areas that they've overrun to make sure there are not a few hundred Russian soldiers armed left with their weapons in their rear lines. The Russian losses in material as well are tremendous. We have already a lot of visual evidence of those losses, and regarding those losses, it becomes increasingly unlikely that the Russians will be able to do another serious offensive this year, so within 2022. Right now, one can say fairly justified that the strategic initiative for this war has shifted over to the Ukrainian side, which is now, at least for now, the side that will dictate where the war is happening, where the focus, where the big attacks, etc. are. The initiative is likely on the Ukrainian side. We will see how far they will advance, because in some way it's surprising that they have not advanced further south of the Oskil Reservoir. The only proven advances are directly at the Seversky Donetsk. It might actually mean that the Russians have been able to build a new front line directly behind Izium, just a few kilometers to the east, but we will see within the next few days whether that's true, whether the Russian reinforcements have been able to stop the Ukrainians, or whether the Ukrainians stopped out of their own initiative to prevent an overstretching, which could then actually lead to what you might have read in the past days from the pro-Russian Telegram, from the pro-Russian propagandists in the comment section, etc., that this all is a big ploy and that the Russians are going to destroy the completely overstretched Ukrainian units. This actually would have historic precedence. We see here Kharkiv, and Kharkiv is actually where Erich von Manstein destroyed the advancing Soviet Unions in 1943, where the Russians, after their victory in Volgograd, in Stalingrad, then kept advancing northwest and weren't satisfied basically with which they got, and thus overstretched themselves and allowed Manstein to destroy their forces there. So in this case, it might be a smart move by the Ukrainians to first consolidate before they advance further, but we will see fairly soon, very likely within the next week, whether the Ukrainians take the initiative here again and attack further, or whether they actually are satisfied with this line for the moment and focus their forces on somewhere else. Because the strategic initiative, as said, by my judgment, as of now, it lies with the Ukrainians. Now, from Russia, we have interesting news that the complaints against Putin are growing further and further. And instead of facing them, Putin has actually retreated to Sochi, which should be here. He's actually here. And what's really baffling there is that he canceled planned meetings with the military leadership and with his defense industry. Both would be highly expected and highly needed in a crisis like this, where one of your fronts has basically collapsed, to talk to the military leadership how to solve that situation, maybe replace it, and of course with the industry to talk to them how to best replace the losses. Still, he has canceled his meetings. There are already some rumors on Twitter that there is some coup in preparation. There were some rumors about National Guards blocking the ring road around Moscow. That would have historic precedence, as former coups usually in the Soviet Union happened and in Russia happened when the president was not in Moscow but on vacation. But at the same time, Google Maps showed that the traffic wasn't blocked around the ring road. So that might have as well been a complete fake and just somebody trying to be important and shared a lot on Twitter, which is one of the other things that we're facing here right now. As I said, the pro-Ukrainian side right now seems to find accounts that can claim the most ridiculous thing, and they will still be shared and widely spread, as the winning has been the fact that the Ukrainian side is clearly winning, at least in this very moment, has made everyone euphoric that they don't seem to question much anymore. The good thing is, though, I'm getting ahead again, I'm sorry, as I don't really have a script here, I just have some single points, so occasionally I jump a line. What I meant to say is that we also have news about some more critique from the ultra-nationalist side, where increasingly the voices get louder towards Putin and to his leadership, but they are focusing mostly on Shoigu, who is the defense minister and is wearing military uniform with the general stars on his shoulders all the time, like he's a soldier, which he actually isn't. He is a former disaster minister and probably has done basic training and was a conscript, but he's not from the military career background, and the fact that he was put in a uniform and promoted by Putin doesn't change that. So he's under big criticism by the ultra-nationalist, the militaristic side as of now, and this might be a chance for Putin to deflect the criticism on his war and the defeat he suffered there to some political scapegoats that he might get rid of fairly soon. And as we can see here, it's not only the spread, it's spreading now that deputies in smaller districts are asking for Putin to be prosecuted or for him to resign. I don't think it's a serious threat to his rule yet, but obviously it chips away and it shows how the mood is swinging within the Russian Federation. The good news for Ukraine is, and that's what I initially wanted to say when I said the good news is that from the information now, it seems the Kremlin has cancelled all annexation referendi in Ukraine when it comes to its territory that Russia wanted to annex. This is both good, as this will not be a hindrance in any potential negotiations with Russia, that Russia would lose face if it has to return territory that it officially annexed. And also this means that the fear that Russia might annex the territory really quick to then threaten further Ukrainian advances with tactical nukes. At least in this regard, this fear seems to be unjustified for this very moment. Unfortunately, though, in the areas that are being liberated, the Ukrainians find more and more victims that have been tortured and executed. Basically, Bucha all over again. There are more and more cases coming up of those victims being identified. When it comes to support for Ukraine, this is something which the English-speaking people might be interested in. The German defense industry, the company Rheinmetall, has reported that out of its own pocket, it already got 16 Marder infantry fighting vehicles back in working order and is willing to hand them over to the Ukrainians, but the German government under Chancellor Scholz is denying that permission. They are not allowing Rheinmetall to deliver them. Rheinmetall is one of the defense companies that offered military aid to Ukraine basically on day 2 or 3, including they have a lot of material in their stock for spare parts, for refurbishment, for sales to other nations, for modernization, etc. So the defense companies own significant stocks, including I think it was over 100 Leopard 1 tanks. Now that's the Leopard 1 A5, which is obviously an obsolete tank, but it still has thermal visions and it has the 105 millimeter L7. And in case, I'm not completely sure, but in case for instance, the American, I think it is the M900 round would fit in that, it could even be given firepower that is close to a match for the Russian tanks. And as we've seen, the Ukrainians can make a lot with seemingly obsolete equipment, but the German government is refusing the defense industry to hand over equipment or to sell it to the Ukrainians as of now. What is good though is what we see here from Poland. So seemingly, as said, I can't really prove that picture. I can't really qualify this as true, but it seems likely we see the 2 stripes here, which are the identification friend-foe sign for the Ukrainians, and this supposedly is showing Mi-24 Hind attack helicopter that is damaged and being transported to Poland for repairs. The Ukrainians say the Russians are not sending fresh troops because the fresh troops would have been with volunteers and they are refusing to fight. There are some rumors, some reports from inside of Russia, for instance. One volunteer gained, his story became known. He claimed that he was a volunteer in Ukraine, was wounded, and once he returned to Russia, the government deleted his records to avoid having to pay the promised boni, the promised wages, and to take care of his medical needs. In case that is true and in case it is spreading, and it might very well be a Ukrainian information war action, but if that's true and it's spreading, it's definitely not going to help the recruitment effort. What might help is this story though. It's translated now to German. I am not completely sure how I would have to switch it to English, but it's from the Russian in original. And the story is this: the governor of Khabarovsk Oblast province is assigned by the president, by Moscow. And he was sent to Khabarovsk in 2020 and is quite unpopular. And the governors have the responsibility. They are asked by the Kremlin to make sure that there are enough volunteers, that the recruitment goes. And so he seemingly has said in the media, in some interview or something, that he would, to support this recruitment drive, that he would love to go to fight in Ukraine himself to show his enthusiasm. But unfortunately, he has to do his job as the governor. And now there's a petition in Khabarovsk where the people are signing to please allow make him retire and allow him to go fight in Ukraine, playing basically with what he said they're trying to, the recruitment. And I thought that's kind of a funny story. And in the end, I have 4 interesting small items. This is in Crimea, as we can see here. It shows a lot of cell phones and laptops with bullet holes to remind soldiers that they shouldn't use those. We have here the new version of a famous old propaganda leaflet that was supposedly in Soviet Union showing was meant to show that the Russians should deny vodka, alcohol. And here it's saying, basically say no to cell phones. And the reason why we can see here, there's a whole thread of a lot of Russians taking pictures of themselves and uploading it to VK. VK is, you could say, more or less a Russian version of Facebook. They're uploading it with their geotags on, so you can download the pictures and click on them. And here, for instance, you have this one, and you see exactly the GPS location, the exact location where he was. And obviously those pictures mean that you can identify where Russian troops are. You can identify sometimes in the background the individual buildings where Russian troops are housed. You can identify units, how they are moving around, and thus giving the Ukrainians a lot of information. And there are even, I've reported in the situation reports in the past of instances where those informations, pictures the Russians took, led to Ukrainian artillery strikes and high losses on the Russian side. And now we have a video from Ukraine. It shows Ukrainian Mi-8. We see how incredibly low they fly, and now they arc up and basically shoot their unguided missiles as some kind of artillery, unguided artillery in a ballistic arc, and you see how incredibly low they fly. And here you see nicely the tree line. They were flying below the tree line, close to the front, arcing up to shoot the missiles in a ballistic arc, so they can be used as airborne artillery. As soon as they clear the ground, they start launching flares, which are high heat, basically light signals with high heat that should attract missiles that are infrared guided, heat-seeking missiles, air-ground missiles, so the helicopter is not hit, but those flares are hit. And here you can see how the Ukrainian Air Force is still able to operate by flying like these daredevils here, extremely low, and just arcing up for shooting and then going down immediately again. You can see it here from the inside, and they're already turning around, launching flares and going back right back on the deck. And here you can easily see how they can use geographic features to shield them completely, even from detection with radar, but also from being shot at. And what happens if you don't fly low enough, we can see here. That's a video of two Russian Su-25 that are basically doing the same thing. They are arcing up, shooting their missiles as unguided rockets and in a ballistic arc, and you saw him launching a few flares, but he is obviously quite stingy with it, and we can see what will be the result of that. See, and you also see that they stay in roughly 250 meters altitude. I'd guess maybe it's even more, but they are far from going as low as the Ukrainians. Here you can even see the Russian sigil of the Air Force, and he's looking, and there it is. There you can see the smoke trail of a SAM, a surface-to-air missile, likely shoulder-launched Stinger, and here you can see a detonation right next to the other Su-25. Whether it was a hit is likely, even though we don't see any smoke trail, we don't see anything yet, at least I can't see anything, but the Su-25 is basically the Soviet equivalent to, is there something? Almost looks like it's a small smoke trail. It's basically the Soviet equivalent to the A-10 Warthog. It's meant for the same role, close air support, ground attack. So it's built in a way that it's sturdy and it can take some hits. And there are actually from this war too some videos and pictures of incredibly shot up planes that somehow made it back to the airport. That's it for now. I hope you enjoyed it. Here, again, I want to thank the supporters of the channel. This channel is obviously not possible without supporters like you. Viewers like you enable me to find the time, do the research, and do those videos. So if you also want to support the channel, you can do so by the means shown in the description. Other than that, the usual social media stuff. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. Don't forget the bell button so you don't miss other videos. Recommend the channel to your friends and acquaintances, and don't forget the thumbs up and leave me some comments when you think the Ukrainian offensive will continue next and where do you think it's going to continue from now. That's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.